They laughed when he stuttered, then kicked him out of first class because of his skin. No warnings, no subtlety, just a brutal dismissal in front of a silent cabin. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just stood up, adjusted his jacket, a military-style coat no one bothered to notice, and walked to the back of the plane like he'd done it 100 times before. But this wasn't just another act of everyday humiliation. This was the spark that would burn through a billion-dollar corporation from the inside out. What none of them knew, what she didn't know, the flight attendant who sneered at his voice and waved his veteran card away like junk mail, was that she wasn't just insulting a passenger. She was insulting someone with the power to bury her career and everyone sitting above him, without saying a single word. Not yet. You're watching the first chapter of a series where silence isn't weakness, it's warning. And dignity doesn't beg for recognition. It remembers. Before we take you to the beginning, before the boarding pass, before the judgment, before the collapse, tell us, where are you watching from? What would you have done if you saw this happen in real time? Drop a comment. Hit that subscribe button if stories like this speak to something deeper in you. And like the video if you're ready to follow this all the way through. Because trust me, this doesn't end where you think. Clement walked slowly, not out of uncertainty, but because each step came with a quiet ache. The price of an IED blast 15 years ago in Fallujah. His gait bore the rhythm of resilience, steady and unapologetic. He wore a dark olive military jacket, the kind that had seen years of duty and pride. 3 service ribbons and a polished bronze star were stitched above the left pocket. They weren't for show. They were his history, his truth. Yet, as he stepped into the aircraft's narrow cabin, there was no recognition, no nods, no thank yous, just the shuffle of other passengers eager to reach their seats, tapping at their phones or tugging at their designer luggage. The flight attendant by the front door, blonde, sharply dressed, clipboard in hand, flashed him a brief, transactional smile, the same kind she'd offer someone returning a rental car. "Seat number?" she asked without looking up. "2C," Clement replied, his voice warm but quiet, tinged with the subtle rasp age and experience leave behind. "Business class," she repeated, a slight pause in her voice. Clement nodded. She marked something on her list without lifting her eyes. "Right side, second row." She stepped aside, already calling good morning to the couple boarding behind him. Clement made his way down the narrow aisle, dragging his right foot just slightly with each step. The jacket didn't just carry medals, it carried stories, battles, brothers lost. But here, at 30,000 feet, those things didn't seem to matter. He passed passengers who glanced at him with fleeting curiosity before returning to their podcasts and screens. Some offered awkward half-smiles. Others didn't look at all. At seat 2C, he paused and gently lowered his bag into the overhead bin. The man in 2A, a white-haired gentleman in a press suit, glanced up from his tablet with a furrowed brow, but said nothing. Clement took his seat, adjusted the armrest, and exhaled slowly. He looked out the window, watching as a baggage cart zipped past on the tarmac below. For a moment, he allowed himself a small smile. It had been a long time since he returned to D.C. This trip wasn't for politics or appearances, it was personal. A quiet mission. Redemption maybe, or closure. He opened the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded photograph. A young soldier, him, stood beside 3 others in desert camo, all grinning under the punishing sun. One was gone now. Another had lost both legs. Clement had survived, but some days it didn't feel like it. The plane filled up quickly. A soft-spoken woman sat beside him, nodded politely, then disappeared behind a paperback novel. Clement didn't mind. He wasn't here to make friends. He reached down to retrieve a small notebook from his bag, flipping through pages filled with tight, meticulous handwriting. Observations, names, patterns. He made a small note about the flight's crew roster, cross-referencing it from memory. Then he paused. "Breathe, Clem," he reminded himself. "You're not back there. You're here. Safe. Sort of." The intercom crackled. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We're just wrapping up final checks, and we'll be departing shortly. Flight time to Washington, D.C. is estimated at 2 hours and 45 minutes. Clement leaned back, closing his eyes. He didn't expect a parade. He didn't need applause. But maybe, just maybe, it would have been nice if someone had seen him, not just physically but truthfully. If someone had looked past the stutter that sometimes emerged when he was tired. If they had recognized the jacket, the medals, the man. But no, not here. Not yet. A cart rolled by as the flight attendants began the pre-flight service. The same blonde woman, her name tag read Marla, stopped briefly at his row. She looked at him as if trying to recall if he was the one who'd asked for extra legroom. Water, she offered flatly. Yes, please, Clement said, his voice slightly cracking at the first word. She tilted her head, a flicker of something in her expression. Confusion? Amusement, before handing him a plastic cup without a word. Then she moved on. Clement took a sip, letting the coolness settle his nerves. He had faced bullets, roadside bombs, and insurgent firestorms. Clement Vaughn remained seated in 2C, still holding the small plastic cup Marla had handed him moments ago. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear or turbulence, but from the cold echo of being overlooked. He took another sip, hoping the water would help ease the tightness growing in his throat. Across from him, the man in 2A continued tapping away on his tablet, seemingly unaware of the quiet tension brewing beside him. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft, ambient glow as Marla moved through the aisle again with the drink cart, heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. She stopped at row 2, her eyes briefly scanning Clement before addressing the woman in 2D. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" she asked with a polished tone of someone used to rehearsing politeness. The woman declined, and Marla turned to Clement, her expression unchanged. "And you, sir?" "Another drink." Clement nodded slightly. "WW water, please," he said, his voice catching on the first syllable, a stammer he had lived with since his injury. It wasn't always present, but fatigue and stress often made it surface. Marla blinked, then tilted her head, letting a smirk curl at the edge of her lips. "Whoa, water, got it," she mimicked under her breath, just loud enough for the nearby passengers to hear. The man in 2A gave a short chuckle, not malicious, but awkward, an instinctive laugh at something unexpected. Clement's eyes didn't leave hers. He didn't speak. He just waited, letting the silence wrap around them like a fog. Marla poured the water, placing it on his tray with a loud clack, her smile strained but intact. "There you go, champ," she said, then leaned toward her fellow flight attendant, a younger woman named Hazel, who had just joined her from the rear of the cabin. "I swear," Marla whispered, though her voice carried more than she realized, "some folks act like they're still lost in boot camp. Did you hear that stutter? I thought my earpiece was glitching." Hazel's face stiffened, eyes darting toward Clement, who was now staring out the window, face composed but distant. "Marla," Hazel murmured cautiously, "maybe tone it down. He's right there." But Marla brushed her off with a laugh. "Please. He's probably too confused to even realize we're talking about him." Behind them, the businessman in 3B chuckled audibly, adding, "Probably thinks he's still in basic training." A few more hushed giggles followed, carried through the cabin like static. Clement didn't react. He remained still, eyes fixed on the rolling clouds outside. But inside, a slow heat was building. Not rage. He'd seen too much for that. It was something colder, more precise. He reached into his inner pocket and retrieved a folded piece of paper, scribbled something in the margin, and tucked it away again. It wasn't the first time he'd been reduced to a joke. It wouldn't be the last. But this was different. This wasn't some anonymous street or loud bar. This was an airline flight, a federal transport vehicle. And Marla Densley had just stepped across a line she didn't know existed. In the galley, Hazel tried once more to steer Marla away from her mockery. "You don't know who he is," she warned, her voice lower now. "He could be someone important. I mean, did you see that jacket?" But Marla rolled her eyes and poured herself a quick espresso shot. "Please. It's always the quiet ones that think they're special. A few medals don't mean much these days. Everyone's got a story." She downed the espresso, then smoothed her uniform and headed back into the cabin. ready to begin meal service. As she passed Clement's row again, her expression shifted from amusement to indifference. "Enjoy your drink, sir," she said flatly, not meeting his gaze. Clement Vaughn, still seated in 2C, kept his gaze steady on the seat in front of him, trying to focus, not dwell. But the whispers had left a mark, subtle as a bruise, and his grip on the armrest reflected it. Marla returned once more to the front of the business class cabin, now holding a small tablet in her hands, eyes scanning the digital manifest with exaggerated scrutiny. "Looks like we've got a late boarding clearance," she announced to Hazel, the junior attendant, who looked up from organizing snack trays. "Passenger rescheduled last minute. Platinum tier. Needs to be accommodated up here." Hazel blinked. "Up here, as in this row? It's full, Marla." Marla smirked slightly, gesturing subtly toward Clement's seat. "Not if we clean it up a little." She stepped back into the cabin, her tone suddenly crisp, officious. "Sir," she said, addressing Clement without warmth, "I'm going to need to reassign your seat. We've had a tier priority passenger added to this cabin. I'll find you a more appropriate spot." Clement blinked slowly, straightening just slightly in his seat. "I was assigned this row at check-in," he said, his voice level controlled. "I'm not moving unless there's a legitimate reason." Marla leaned forward slightly, placing a hand on the headrest in front of him. "Sir, this is a courtesy. We've had a scheduling issue. You'll still be on the flight, just in the main cabin. We can offer a beverage voucher." Clement pulled a slim wallet from his jacket and produced a card. The card was black embossed in gold, with a Department of Veterans Affairs logo on one side and a military ID barcode on the other. "This says I'm eligible for military priority seating," he said. "Same status as your platinum tier passengers, if not higher." Marla took the card, glanced at it for a second too long, then laughed. An empty, performative chuckle meant more for nearby ears than his. "Oh wow," she said. "This thing's still a thing? No offense, but these are more like thank you souvenirs. Doesn't really hold up against executive tier upgrades." Her voice dropped a note in tone, casual but cutting. "I mean, I appreciate your service, truly. But we have guidelines." Clement said nothing. His fingers closed back over the wallet and slid the card away. Around them, a few passengers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable but not engaged. No one objected. No one defended. And then, from a gate entrance, the platinum tier passenger arrived. A tall white man in a charcoal coat, carrying a leather briefcase, and wearing the kind of cologne that announced money before words did. He offered Marla a half smile, and she lit up with charm as if a switch had been flipped. "Mr. Landon, so sorry for the mix-up. We've got a seat just about ready for you." Her gaze snapped back to Clement. "Sir, I need you to move now so we can get this sorted quickly. Thank you for understanding." There was no misunderstanding. There was dismissal. Clement slowly stood, collected his notebook and jacket, and looked directly at Marla as he stepped into the aisle. "I don't need a voucher," he said simply. "I just needed to be treated like a person." Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes flickered, just for a second, as he moved past. Hazel stood near the galley, eyes wide, watching it all unfold in silence. A moment later, Mr. Landon slipped into the newly vacated 2C, thanked Marla without looking her in the eye, and opened his laptop with the indifference of a man accustomed to getting what he wants. Clement was led past rows of increasingly cramped seats until he reached the very rear of the aircraft, row 36, seat B. The seat was narrow, squeezed between two strangers, next to a humming engine wall. There was no apology, no explanation, just space. He sat down slowly, the tray table already sticky, and stared forward, muscles taut but unmoving. In front of him, a toddler kicked at the seat in bursts, and to his right, a man sneezed into his sleeve without covering his mouth. He closed his eyes, exhaled slowly, and whispered almost imperceptibly, "They think I won't remember this." And yet, behind him, unknown to Marla or the airline, someone already was. The older woman with the silver hair and the embroidered scarf had stood quietly just after Clement's reassignment. She approached Hazel as Marla disappeared to the galley and whispered something into the junior attendant's ear. He was none of those things, but for Marla densely, His presence up front had been an inconvenience. Now he sat quietly, notebook balanced on one knee, a pen gliding methodically across the page. Every so often, he would pause and glance toward the front of the plane, not to glare, not even to watch, but to remember. Documentation, not revenge, guided his hand. Meanwhile, Marla bustled through the aisle with a renewed sense of purpose, emboldened by the subtle applause of conformity. The passengers who had witnessed the seat reassignment now wore looks of silent approval or calculated neutrality. Few questioned her judgment. Fewer still dared to voice discomfort. Power, when unchecked, spreads like smoke. As Marla reached row 33, she caught sight of Clement still scribbling, his movements calm, measured. Something about his composure irritated her more than if he had argued. She stopped abruptly beside his row, resting a hand on the seat back before him. "Sir," she said, her tone clipped, "I'm going to ask you to put away the notebook. It's distracting to other passengers." Clement looked up, his brow furrowed. "I wasn't aware writing in silence was disruptive." Marla's lips thinned. "Your attitude is. You've already been moved once. Don't escalate things further." Her voice was louder now, loud enough for the rows nearby to hear. A young man across the aisle looked up from his tablet. A teenager 2 rows ahead took out her phone, pretending to scroll, though her camera was clearly aimed at the interaction. "I'm not causing a disturbance," Clement replied, voice firm but calm. "I've been recording my thoughts in private. That's within my rights as a passenger." Marla's jaw tightened. "If you continue this behavior, I'll have no choice but to alert the captain and involve airport security upon landing. Do I make myself clear?" Clement met her eyes. "Crystal," he said. Around them, a few passengers murmured, some shifting uncomfortably. But then, from near the front of the plane, a man's voice called out, "Good on you, miss. Keep the order." A smattering of light applause followed, hesitant, not celebratory, but just enough to punctuate the power dynamic. Marla straightened her posture like someone confirmed in their role. She turned on her heel and walked away, her spine rigid, her stride rehearsed. Clement exhaled through his nose, closed the notebook slowly, and slipped it into the inner pocket of his coat. His heart wasn't pounding. This wasn't new. It was just more public than usual. But pain in the open doesn't hurt less. It just makes dignity harder to hold. Hazel watched from the galley, her expression clouded. She had served 3 years as a flight attendant, long enough to know when something crossed a line. And today, that line had been obliterated. She considered speaking up again, but remembered Marla's warning earlier. Stay in your lane if you want to stay on the schedule. In seat 5F, the silver-haired woman with the embroidered scarf had not stopped watching. Her phone remained in her lap, screen dark, camera still recording. She had seen enough. She knew what power looked like, and what cowardice did in its shadow. Down in row 36, Clement adjusted his seat, folded his arms, and leaned back. A child behind him kicked the seat gently, and for once he didn't mind. The child was innocent. The system was not. Several rows up, Marla began distributing dinner trays with robotic cheerfulness, offering smiles with more precision than sincerity. Hazel handed out drinks without a word, her eyes shadowed by conflict. And in the captain's cockpit, a notification pinged on the dashboard, an internal message from operations. A security flag had been activated on seat 36B, marked for potential noncompliance. It had been sent by the head flight attendant, Marla Densley. The captain blinked at the screen and frowned. "Really?" he muttered, then leaned back and looked at the co-pilot. Old guy in the back, military jacket. "Doesn't look like a threat to me." The air back here was thicker, more recycled, as if the very atmosphere had resigned itself to being second class. Clement's head rested gently against the side panel, his eyes unfocused, watching condensation gather and drift across the tiny window. He wasn't angry. Not yet. Anger required the illusion that something better had been possible. This was something else. Around him, passengers avoided eye contact. Not out of hostility, but out of that uniquely modern form of denial, the willful blindness that comes from not wanting to feel responsible. Their silence was not neutral, it was protective, for themselves, not for him. Across the aisle, a young girl sat perched on her knees, looking over her mother's shoulder. Her voice rose above the engine noise, innocent and piercing. "Mommy, why did that man get moved way back here?" Her mother stiffened, whispering, "Sho, it's not polite to talk about people." But the girl persisted. "But he has medals on his jacket. Did he do something bad?" The mother placed a hand gently over the child's mouth and leaned in, whispering with urgency, "He probably broke a rule or something. People don't get moved unless they do." Clement heard every word, and though his eyes remained on the window, his jaw tightened. Not because of the child. She asked what any honest child would. It was the mother's answer that stung. Not "I don't know," or "maybe someone made a mistake." No, she defaulted to guilt, to assumption. That reflex to assign blame where there was difference. That's how reputations get ruined. Wars get started, and systems stay rigged. Nearby, a flight attendant passed without offering Clement a drink, a snack, or even a glance. It wasn't Hazel. She hadn't returned to this part of the plane since the last confrontation. Instead, it was a younger male attendant, newer, unsure, trained in procedure but not in discernment. He moved mechanically, eyes scanning rows for uniformity, not individuality. Clement remained still, neither requesting nor expecting service. He understood the landscape now. He wasn't a passenger anymore. He was a problem the staff hoped would stay silent until landing. Overhead, a soft chime rang out as turbulence rocked the aircraft gently, a reminder that even the sky could turn rough without notice. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady and practiced. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've hit a minor air pocket. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The announcement went largely ignored by the business class rows up front, who sipped their wine and tapped to tablets. But in row 36, every bounce was felt like a warning. The girl across the aisle squealed lightly at the jolt, burying her face into her mother's arm. The mother gave her daughter a tight smile and muttered, "Don't worry, sweetie. They'll handle it. That's what they're trained for." Clement smiled to himself, the irony pressing against his teeth. Trained? He'd spent years flying over hostile terrain, guiding cargo planes through anti-aircraft fire, dodging missiles with instinct and sweat and prayer. And now, here he was, relegated to the last row like lost baggage, labeled disruptive, inconvenient, expendable. As the turbulence subsided, he reached into the pocket of his duffel and withdrew a folded page, the official clearance from the Department of Defense. It bore his name, title, and clearance level, signed in ink with federal authentication. He looked at it for a long moment, then tucked it back. Not yet. Truth had a time and place to speak. And when it did, no one would mistake it for noise. 2 rows ahead, a teenage boy watched Clement with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. He nudged his father and whispered something inaudible. The man glanced back, then leaned toward his son and said, "Don't stare. Just focus on your book." But the boy's eyes didn't move. Something about Clement's stillness, the quiet control, the silent dignity, spoke louder than the captain's announcements. Dignity doesn't shout. It waits. It endures. It outlasts. From the front of the plane, Marla strolled confidently back to the galley, where she chuckled with a colleague about how dramatic some passengers get when they don't get what they want. Hazel didn't laugh. She quietly folded her arms and looked down the aisle toward the back. The earlier confrontation had done little to rattle her. In fact, it seemed to fortify her self-importance. She smiled graciously at the platinum-tier passengers, addressing them by name, topping off their wine glasses, offering extra attention to those wearing tailored suits and designer shoes. To her, these were the passengers who mattered, the ones who validated her professionalism, the ones who belonged. As she reached row 2, she paused beside Mr. Landon, the late-arriving executive who had replaced Clement in 2C. "Everything to your liking, sir?" she asked, her voice a melody of curated warmth. He gave a curt nod, didn't even look up from his tablet. Marla didn't mind. Approval wasn't always verbal. It was in the way people didn't complain. She turned, catching the eye of Hazel, who stood quietly near the galley, tray in hand. "Keep it smooth," Marla mouthed to her, then rolled her eyes as if to say, "See what I mean about some passengers?" Hazel nodded, though her eyes flicked to the back of the plane, where she hadn't ventured since Clement was reassigned. A beat later, Marla leaned casually against the partition near row 1 and began a hushed but biting conversation with another attendant. "You know what the problem is?" she whispered, not trying particularly hard to keep her voice from carrying. "These upgrade programs. You give some folks a voucher or a military tag, and suddenly they think they're entitled to sit with people who actually earn it." The attendant gave a half laugh, unsure whether to agree or just stay silent. Marla continued anyway, emboldened by her own narrative. "Honestly, business class used to mean something. Now, it's just full of people playing pretend. Like that guy earlier. What was his name again? Vaughn? Couldn't even speak straight, but expected the red carpet treatment. It's exhausting." Her tone dripped with entitlement, and while most passengers nearby pretended not to hear, one did not. In seat 3A near the window, an older man with neatly combed silver hair and a discreet hearing aid sat still, his phone held low, angled just slightly toward Marla. He didn't react. He didn't interrupt. He simply let the video roll, capturing every word, every sneer, every casual cruelty. His face was unreadable, stoic, perhaps even stern, but his grip on the phone was steady. He had seen this before, not on flights, but in boardrooms, in hiring meetings, in silent elevators, where respect evaporated the moment credentials weren't visible. He had lived through decades of polite prejudice and knew it well by its tone. Marla, still unaware, moved down the row with a lightness in her step. The flight was half over. No turbulence. No real problems. And to her, that meant one thing. She had done her job well. In her mind, the matter with the man in 36B was closed. He had been dealt with. Quietly. Effectively. Professionally. Hazel, meanwhile, lingered in the galley, pretending to check inventory. Her mind replayed every moment, Clement's stillness, his tone, the way Marla dismissed the veteran card as if it were a raffle ticket. She glanced toward the passenger manifest again, her thumb tracing down the screen until she found the entry. Von Clement E. Priority Government Clearance, Seat 2C, relocated. The note caught her breath. Government clearance? Her stomach twisted. No one had mentioned that. Was it just a formality? Or had Marla genuinely removed someone who shouldn't have been moved? As Hazel scanned the manifest again, a familiar chime echoed from the front console. The cockpit was sending a notification, standard protocol, likely a weather update. But something else was stirring. In seat 36B, Clement reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain black phone, tapping in a short message. He kept the screen angled away, the content obscured. But his face revealed something different this time. Not irritation, not even quiet anger. There was resolve. Precise, practiced resolve. Meanwhile, in the middle of the cabin, the teenage girl who had earlier hidden her recording had now begun compiling clips. She added text, highlighted timestamps, and overlaid a title. "When Respect Isn't Optional, A Flight Story." She didn't know Clement's full story, but she knew what she'd seen, and that was enough. The phone in 3 remained steady as Marla passed again, still talking, now complaining about passenger entitlement in general. "They expect 5-star service like this is the Ritz," she muttered. "But they fly once a year and act like they own the sky." The message he had just sent contained only a few words, but they were words that shifted weight in the world of federal logistics. Field conditions logged. Recommendation pending. That message had gone not to a friend, not to a complaint hotline, but directly to the senior contracting office at the Department of Defense. His direct line of oversight for a $900 million military transport contract. The moment he sent it, the entire trajectory of Aerosky Airlines began to tilt on an axis invisible to everyone on board except him. Clement wasn't just a passenger. He wasn't just a veteran. He was the Pentagon's embedded operations evaluator, tasked with assessing compliance and ethical conduct of commercial carriers that were up for renewal on the country's largest troop and equipment transport contract. Only 5 individuals in the United States government knew his identity or the fact that this flight had been selected as one of several unannounced assessments. He had boarded quietly, chosen business class without flagging his name, and waited to see if the airline service met not just federal protocol, but human decency. What he found was not simply negligence, it was prejudice. And prejudice, when documented in uniform, in real time, under an ID with operational clearance, became something far more devastating than a bad review. It became disqualifying. At the front of the plane, Marla laughed again as she handed Mr. Landon a hot towel, completely unaware that the man she had demoted and mocked now held the power to dismantle a year's worth of lobbying, PR campaigns, and executive networking. Clement had seen worse than this. Men stripped of dignity in more brutal ways, on dusty roads far from home. But what always stung the most was how easy it was for the powerful to dismiss the quiet. Across the aisle, the girl who had been silently filming continued compiling clips on her phone, adding captions that pointed out every word Marla had said about people pretending they belong. She didn't know Clement's name, but she didn't need to. His story was already writing itself, frame by frame. 2 rows up, the silver-haired man, in 3A, finally stopped recording and began typing a text. He had sat on boards before: corporate, government, private equity. He knew what a scandal looked like before it broke. He also knew how quickly an internal video could become the focus of a congressional hearing. And while he said nothing, the fact that he was typing at all meant the dominoes had started tipping. Hazel, in the galley, finally stepped away from the beverage station and approached the front, quietly flagging Marla's attention. "We need to talk," she said, voice low. "About Mr. Vaughn." Marla rolled her eyes. "What now?" she muttered, clearly annoyed. Hazel's voice sharpened, just enough to pierce the veil of Marla's ego. "He's not just some upgrade case. His manifest code includes DoD clearance. Government priority." Marla paused, blinking, the words slow to register. "That doesn't mean—" "It does," Hazel cut in. "It means you removed a government evaluator from his assigned seat. That wasn't just rude, it's reportable. Possibly a violation of the Federal Transport Agreement." For a moment, Marla stood frozen, the tray in her hands suddenly heavier. "He didn't say anything," she protested. Hazel tilted her head. "Would you, if you were him?" Up in the cockpit, the captain received a ping from ground control marked urgent. "Secure report delivery. Flight 613. His brow furrowed. "We've got a flag coming through," he murmured to his co-pilot. "Passenger review protocol triggered. DoD channel." The co-pilot's eyes widened slightly. "Is that related to the seating issue?" The captain didn't answer. He tapped in the acknowledgement code and forwarded the alert to HQ. In seat 36B, Clement closed his eyes and leaned his head against the wall. The silence around him hadn't changed, but everything else had. What began as a quiet injustice was now a federal red flag. What started as mockery would end in exposure. And yet, he felt no triumph. This wasn't about winning. It was about being seen, about making sure the next person with a limp and a history didn't have to carry both alone. The plane began its descent into Washington, D.C., gears shifting, cabin dimming again. Somewhere in a conference room, already awake, a red folder bearing the Aero Sky logo was being pulled from a stack marked Final Review. In the cockpit, the captain received a final encrypted message through the secure channel, marked with priority clearance. "Debrief team ready upon arrival. Escort protocol confirmed." He exhaled and glanced toward his co-pilot, who nodded without a word. They knew something was different about this landing. Near the rear of the plane, Clement Vaughn remained seated as most passengers unbuckled in anticipation. He didn't move. Instead, he waited, still unbothered, unreadable. Hazel passed by to begin final cabin checks, and for the first time since the beginning of the flight, her eyes met his directly. No words passed between them, but the look she gave him wasn't pity. It was respect. Clement nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that she had seen more than most. At the front of the plane, Marla was busy rehearsing her exit spiel, her voice chipper as she thanked everyone for flying with Aerosky Airlines, completely unaware that the thank you would soon turn into a corporate obituary. As the plane came to a halt, the door opened with its usual hiss, and standing just beyond it, flanked by 2 men in dark suits, was a woman in a Navy federal blazer, credentials clipped to her chest, eyes focused. Passenger Vaughn, she said the moment she stepped into the cabin. We're ready for debrief. Marla blinked in confusion, her smile faltering. Excuse me, she said, glancing around. Is something wrong? The agent didn't answer her. She walked directly to row 36 and stood aside as Clement stood, slung his bag over his shoulder, and moved past her without a single glance backward. Passengers parted for him. The teenage girl lowered her phone, stunned. The man in 3A stood as well, slowly, sliding his phone into his coat and following a few paces behind, his presence unnoticed, but intentional. As Clement exited the jet bridge and entered the terminal, another agent handed him a secure tablet. He tapped in a code, uploaded encrypted media files from his phone, and signed a digital clearance document. Transmission received, said the agent. DoD Internal Review Board meets in 3 hours. Aerosky contract is being pulled from the table pending final ruling. Clement nodded once, his voice calm. Send confirmation to General Parks and notify civilian ethics compliance. They'll want access to the footage before media picks it up. Inside the terminal, passengers began checking social media, and a trending video titled, "Veteran Humiliated by Airline Staff Full Flight Footage," had already racked up over 280,000 views within the hour. The teenage girl's clip had gone viral before her luggage had even hit the carousel. By the time Clement entered the black SUV waiting curbside, 2 major cable networks were already broadcasting split-screen coverage. On the left, a dignified military profile of Clement Vaughn. On the right, Marla's voice mocking his stutter, now on loop across every major platform. The story exploded. Federal evaluator removed from assigned seat. Aerosky's billion-dollar blunder. Veteran with clearance exposes airline bias. Inside Aerosky's DC headquarters, chaos erupted. Phones rang without pause, legal counsel was summoned, and the CEO, Donald Mays, was rushed from a strategy meeting to an emergency board call. This is a misunderstanding, he insisted to his general counsel, sweat beading on his forehead. We can apologize, compensate, sir, the lawyer interrupted. This isn't just bad PR. This is breach of contract-level behavior. DoD protocol states that hostile conduct toward federally credentialed personnel voids the terms of engagement. The contract is gone. The news broke publicly 4 hours later. Aerosky's stock dropped 12 points before noon. Government websites scrubbed the airline from future bid lists. Competing airlines released public statements reaffirming their commitment to equity, clearly signaling opportunistic bids for the now vacant $900 million contract. Back at the airport, Marla sat in a small operations room, her hands trembling as her supervisor slid a copy of the incident report across the table. "Why didn't you follow manifest protocol?" he asked quietly. "You ignored a government tag and removed a priority passenger." Marla's lips parted, then closed. She had no answer, only disbelief. He didn't look like. She stopped herself, too late. Her supervisor sighed and stood. "You'll be placed on immediate leave pending investigation." Meanwhile, Clement rode quietly through the city in the back of the SUV, the city lights flickering against the tinted glass. Every news outlet, from major television networks to small independent blogs, ran some version of the same story, only the wording differed. Aerosky fires lead flight attendant over federal humiliation scandal. $900M contract collapse triggers corporate resignations. Silent passenger turns out to be Pentagon evaluator. Marla densely woke up to the sharp chime of her phone, not from an alarm, but from a barrage of alerts she had neither the courage nor clarity to process. She stared blankly at the screen. Messages from old friends, co-workers, even estranged relatives, none offering comfort. Most were links, screenshots, reactions. The viral video had passed 10 million views by dawn. Her face, voice, and name were now burned into the national conversation, synonymous not with hospitality or professionalism, but with condescension, cruelty, and failure. At exactly 7:14 a.m., a black sedan arrived outside her modest Arlington apartment. Inside, a representative from Aerosky's Human Resources Division waited with a file folder, an envelope, and the kind of expression worn by people trained to stay emotionless during terminations. "Ms. Densley," he began with rehearsed decorum, You're being released from duty, effective immediately. The company will not be contesting the breach of ethics findings. Your employment contract has been dissolved under Clause 4C, public misconduct damaging to corporate credibility. Marla stood in her kitchen, barefoot, robe barely tied, her hands trembling as she took the folder. There's got to be a process. A hearing, she whispered, voice hollow. You already had it, the man replied gently but firmly. You just didn't know it was recorded. The door shut behind him, final and absolute. She didn't cry. Not right away. She walked to the bathroom, stared at her reflection under fluorescent light, and tried to recognize the person staring back. Someone who had once won Employee of the Month 3 times in a row, who had trained new hires, who had thought she was respected. Now, she was a symbol. And symbols don't get private grief. They get judgment. Elsewhere, in Aerosky's downtown executive office tower, the fallout rippled fast and hard. CEO Kenton Rhodes sat in a private boardroom facing the rest of the senior leadership team, his posture tense, suit jacket unbuttoned, the stress visible in the loosened knot of his tie. Gentlemen, he said, voice low, I've built this company over 2 decades. You think I'm going to walk away over one employee's mistake? The CFO leaned forward, placing a printout on the table, stock performance, public sentiment metrics, and a projected investor flight risk if Rhodes remained. This wasn't one mistake, the CFO replied. It was systemic. You cultivated a culture that dismissed accountability, and now the federal government has blacklisted us. Temporarily, Rhodes snapped. It's not permanent. It's permanent enough, the COO muttered. We've already been locked out of the upcoming NATO auxiliary bid. 3 of our partners are terminating contracts before next quarter. The chairman of the board entered the room without knocking, placed a signed resignation agreement in front of Rhodes, and said simply, it's done. You resign today, or the board moves to terminate you this afternoon. Kenton stared at the paper, disbelief melting into something more primitive. Anger, humiliation, loss. But he knew. The fight was over. By noon, the press release was out. Kenton Rhodes steps down from Aerosky following ethics scandal. Clement Vaughn watched the announcement from a quiet room in a government facility just outside the city. He said nothing, only nodded once and returned to his work. A new file had arrived, another airline, another evaluation. The mission didn't end with a victory. It continued with a standard. Back in Arlington, Marla sat alone, watching coverage replay her words on loop. These people think they belong here. Her words, her tone, her downfall. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find her sister, Kendra, standing with arms crossed and a grim look. I can't be seen with you right now, Kendra said, her voice tight. I have clients. If they see me connected to this, it's over for me, too. Marla stared, mouth slightly open. I'm your sister. You were. 2 months after the scandal, the media storm had finally quieted, but its echoes still rippled through lives like aftershocks. Marla Densley had vanished from the headlines, but not from consequence. She had moved in with her aunt in a quiet suburb outside Alexandria, taken a part-time job filing invoices at a logistics company that didn't ask many questions, and spent most of her evenings alone, absorbing every article, every comment thread, every angry email from veterans organizations across the country. Shame had etched itself into her posture, into her breath, into the mirror she barely looked into. But silence had given her something else too, reflection. One morning, she opened an envelope marked Civic Initiative for Veteran Equity, a nonprofit that hosted reconciliation forums between civilians and military personnel. There was no invitation, just a folded flyer. Listening session. Veterans and the voices they're denied. Sunday, 4 p.m. Open to all. It wasn't a demand. It was an opening. She stared at it for a long time, unsure if she deserved to show up. But something inside her shifted. Not out of redemption, out of obligation. So that Sunday, she arrived in the back of a modest community hall in Southeast D.C., hair pulled back, no makeup, wearing a plain gray sweater that made her almost invisible. She sat in the last row. No one recognized her, not at first. The stage was small, the setup simple. a circle of chairs, filled with veterans of all ages, colors, branches. Each took turns sharing stories, not of war, but of how they were treated when the uniform came off. One spoke about being ignored in hospitals. Another shared about being mistaken for a janitor at a job interview. And one, a woman who had served 3 tours, told the room how a flight attendant once assumed she was in the wrong seat because she was wearing braids and boots. As the stories unfolded, Marla felt her throat tighten. These weren't accusations. They were revelations of pain made mundane, of dignity erased in casual glances and careless words. Then, a voice she had heard only in memory filled the room. "I was asked to move seats," Clement Vaughn said calmly from the circle. "It wasn't the first time, but it was the first time I wrote it down." Murmurs rippled, recognizing the name. Clement continued, "I didn't speak up because I wanted revenge. I spoke up because the silence was helping no one. Not me, not her." He didn't mention Marla by name. He didn't need to. The room knew. Marla stood. Her legs shook, and for a moment she thought she might sit back down, might run. But she didn't. She walked forward, eyes wide with fear and something deeper, honesty. "My name is Marla," she said, voice trembling. "And I was that flight attendant." The room froze. A few eyes narrowed. One man exhaled hard, folding his arms. She kept going. "I didn't think I was a bad person. But the truth is, I didn't think at all. I made someone feel less than human because I thought I had the right to decide who mattered on that plane. And I never asked myself why I believed that." She paused, her hands clutched together tightly. "I saw a man who spoke differently, looked tired, didn't fit my idea of first class. And I decided he didn't belong. I was wrong. And I'm sorry." The silence was thick. A few faces softened. Others remained hard. Then Clement stood. He walked over, slowly, every step deliberate. He looked her in the eyes. "I don't forgive you because you asked," he said quietly. "I forgive you because you showed up when you didn't have to. Because you listened." He extended his hand. Marla stared for a moment, then took it. It wasn't applause that followed. It was breath, collective, quiet, shared. The room shifted, not in triumph, but in truth. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the Capitol dome, Clement stepped outside the center and looked up at the sky, blue fading to gold. He didn't smile, but his eyes were clear. Nearby, Marla sat alone on a bench, watching families cross the park, a baby laughing in the distance. She didn't feel redeemed. She felt responsible. And that, she realized, was the beginning of something better than forgiveness. It was the start of becoming different. In a world desperate for loud victories, sometimes the quietest moment is the one that matters most. The end. If this story moved you, consider liking the video and subscribing for more true narratives that reveal hidden truths and quiet acts of courage. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment hit you the hardest? Was it Marla's public apology, Clement's silent dignity, or the moment justice was served? Drop a comment and let us know which part stayed with you the most. Also, tell us where in the world you're watching from. It's always powerful to see how far these stories travel.